In today's video, I'm going to share with you 5 unique lures to catch late summertime smallmouth bass. Let's dive into this thing. What's going on, everyone? My name is Benjamin Nowak, and as I mentioned in the introduction, this video is going to be talking about unique baits that most guys aren't throwing to catch late summertime smallmouth. And what really got me thinking about this was KVD's last event, the Bass Pro Tour, on the Saginaw Bay, and he almost won it fishing a bladed jig. So that's going to be one of the baits that we talk about, but it's a bait that you don't typically hear people associate with late summertime smallmouth. Now, before we dive into the video, if you guys aren't already subscribed and you like catching smallmouth or just like watching fish being caught, hit the subscribe button down below. It's going to let you know when I post more videos just like this one. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this thing. So as I mentioned, KVD almost won that Bass Pro Tour event fishing a bladed jig. And to me, this caught me very off guard. I wasn't expecting someone to throw a bladed jig and have success catching smallmouth. This is something, admittedly, I've never done. I've never had success with. But I want to give you guys some other options, some baits that I throw during the late summertime to catch fish. And I guess let's start by talking about the bladed jig that Kevin was throwing and some ways that you guys can use this in your arsenal as one of our baits that we're talking about in this video. So in the last Bass Pro Tour event on the Saginaw Bay, Kevin VanDam found some shallower grass or shallower rock piles in about 8 to 12 foot of water. And what he was doing, instead of throwing a swim bait, which would be a traditional summertime approach for smallmouth, he was taking a bladed jig and he was making really long fan casts over this area with those isolated rock piles and triggering those fish to react. He was getting those fish to come up and react to his bait because this bait has natural erratic action. One of the other keys to this presentation, because when you're fishing around smallmouth, normally you're not fishing around vast grass areas, is using a varied retrieve. So what I mean by that is when you cast this bait out and you get this bait way away from the boat, you want to change your retrieve with your reel handle or pop the rod to cause that bait to dart side to side, have a very erratic action. Another unique retrieve is a yo-yo retrieve, and you hear a lot of guys talk about this with a lipless crankbait, which is another bait we're going to be talking about. But that yo-yo retrieve keeps this bait in the strike zone longer, up and down, and it allows those smallmouth a lot longer time to track that bait and come and find it. Now, a couple of the unique things that Kevin did was he found some off-colored water. Typically, a lot of guys think of Great Lakes smallmouth fishing as being really clean water situations. The water was pretty off-colored in the area that he was fishing, so instead of throwing a standard swim bait, he was going with a bladed jig, a vibrating jig, and being able to cover a ton of water, making fan casts over a vast, isolated rock patch. And that was allowing him to catch a lot of fish. So the bladed jig that I'm going to throw when I go out and try this for smallmouth is going to be the Jackhammer Stealth Blade. For me, I really like that clear lip. A lot of times I'm fishing a little bit cleaner water, and that clear blade on there is still going to give that bait vibration, but it's going to give it a little bit less profile in the water, not as much flash, and that's something that I really like about this bait. And then I'm going to pair it up with a Beast Coast Blade Runner. It's a little bit longer profile off the back, but it runs really true behind this bait. And so really whatever action you impart to this bait, whatever action that blade imparts, that trailer is going to stay pretty true, and it's going to let you really fish this bait very effectively. A lot of times if you put a swim bait on the back, it's going to cause that bait to do a lot of funky things, which is not what I'm looking for when I'm going to be doing a straight retrieve or yo-yo retrieve with a bladed jig. Now when you're picking out a rod for this, I'm going to pick like a 7.3 medium heavy or a 7.4 cranking rod, like a 7.4 medium heavy moderate bend. The benefit of that is having a really long rod, you can get that bait away from you. Long distance, you want to create separation between you and that bait. You can also move that line a lot more quickly because a lot of times these aggressive smallmouth, when they hit that bait, they're going to be coming towards you, so you want to pick up line really fast. To pair with that, I'm putting it on a 7-speed reel. This is critically important, a 7-speed, which is a little bit faster than a lot of guys throw with a bladed jig, because you need to be able to pick up that line really quickly. You have to kind of slow yourself down a little bit so that way you're not just buzzing through areas. But when that fish does bite, you can catch up to them more effectively with a 7-speed gear ratio, and then 14 to 17 pound test fluorocarbon. It's going to allow that bait to really stay down in the water column, and for me, fluorocarbon is a must when I'm fishing moving baits like this. So the first unique bait in my arsenal that I use for summertime smallmouth is going to be a lipless crankbait. And you guys see me fish this a ton in the springtime, but this is also a very effective technique to go and catch summertime smallmouth. In fact, a lipless crankbait was the very first bait that I ever caught a smallmouth on on the Great Lakes. I caught it yo-yoing blue and chrome lipless crankbait over these big gravel flats, and it's a great way to catch fish. So one of the benefits of this is really being able to make long casts, cover vast areas really quickly, because a lot of times on our Great Lakes, these fish will push onto these shallower flats, 6 to 12 foot of water, and being able to use a lipless crankbait allows you to cover water quickly, draw fish from long ways away, and it's a bait that they can come find and get. Now this bait is a Spiro Uruku Shad Jr. It's the half-ounce model. Another one I really like is the Duo Realis G-Fix 68, I believe, and really the key here is getting a bait with a smaller profile that has a really nice hunting action in the water that you can cast long distances. So you want a small profile with a heavy size. I wouldn't go typically less than 1/2 of an ounce. I want to be able to zing this bait away from the boat, similar to that bladed jig, to give me the best opportunity. Now my retrieves are going to be pretty similar to that bladed jig as well. I want to use like a straight fast retrieve with varied handle motions. So when I'm reeling that handle, I'm going to stop. I'm going to move that bait. I'm going to cause it to dart up and down and create some variation using the rod and using the reel. Or you can use a yo-yo retrieve, and to me a yo-yo is probably one of the most effectively. It keeps that bait in the strike zone a long time. You make that cast, you let it start to sink, you turn the handle slow, lift and drop, lift and drop. And I'm not really fishing this around grass, so keeping that bait in the strike zone is really, really important. I'm not trying to trigger them out of a piece of cover. I'm trying to trigger them as they're behind that bait looking at it. Another real key here is the rod. This is a TFO Tactical Glass rod. It is a composite rod, and so it bends really deep down into the blank. When I'm fishing a bait with small treble hooks, having a composite rod is really, really important. It lets those fish, or helps those fish, stay pinned on these really small treble hooks, but still letting me make long casts. It's a 7.4 medium heavy, so it's a longer rod. I can make really incredibly long casts with this bait, but when they do eat it at the end of a long cast, I'm able to get a positive hook set, and because it's composite, keep those fish pinned really effectively. The reel I'm throwing it on is a 6-speed gear ratio, high reel capacity, because you want to make long casts. You want to get that bait away from you, and that 6-speed gear ratio is perfect when you're fishing a bait with those small treble hooks that you want to keep at a moderate pace. And then I'm fishing it on 14-pound test fluorocarbon line. That's just pretty much my go-to for moving baits during the summertime. Color selection I'm going to keep really, really simple. I'm going to use blue, black, chrome. I'm going to use like your perch style colors, something with some flash to it, or I'm going to use a white. I'm going to use that white style color when there's overcast, when it's cloudy, when those fish maybe can't see quite as well, and I'm going to use that blue back chrome or that chrome sided bait when it's sunny out and those fish can see long distances in cleaner water. So really, really simple color pattern selection. Just pick up a chrome style color with blue back or green back and some sort of maybe whitish sexy shad style color that's going to silhouette well in the water. And I'll have all that linked down in the description below for you guys. Now that we've talked about those heavier line, faster moving approaches, we're going to talk about light line approach that's going to catch you some giant fish this year. And this is a bait that's gotten a ton of national attention over the past couple of seasons, so it really is no secret, but I'm going to share with you some new models and some ways you can fish this to catch more bass than other guys during the late summertime, and that is a Spybait. The bait I have here is a Spinbait 80, but we're also going to talk about the Spinbait 100, one of their brand new models, and ways that I use this bait to go out and catch fish. One of the benefits of this is really its ability to just get a lot of bites. And one of the things I've noticed about a Spinbait is being able to fish it around shallower water, less than 10 foot when I can see into the water, and target isolated pieces of cover and isolated bottom changes. You can see the color changes, and what I'm doing is casting this bait past them, letting it sink a couple feet down into the water, and using a slow, steady retrieve. One of the really nice things about a Spinbait, a Spybait from Duo Realis, is it has a very natural listing action rolling back and forth. It also has a ton of drawing power, so you don't have to impart a lot of action on this bait, and you'll still get a lot of bites. What I'm doing is I'm using this to cover those shallow flats, cover those areas where I know fish are up in the shallows, and target those areas where those fish are basically camouflaged into the bottom. So that's one of the unique ways that I'm fishing the Spinbait 80 that maybe other guys aren't. It's also a very effective suspended fish approach, but what I've realized is that the 80 doesn't have quite the drawing power as the larger size 100. Now the 100 size hasn't quite gotten the attention yet that the 80 has gotten, but where this plays a lot is on those suspended fish. When a lot of guys are going out there and throwing that 80 size, trying to match the hatch with those small bait fish, when they get on that larger perch, that larger bait fish, as you get later into the summer, and you want to target those fish over 15 to 20 foot of water, this 100 size is incredibly effective at doing that. The reason for is you can let this bait sink basically mid-column and it will draw those fish from a long ways away. Now I've had some conversations with David over at Duo, and one of the keys to this is basically its ability for those fish to track it from deeper water. So you'll notice a lot more aggressive strikes on the 100 than the 80. They're not just going to typically nip at this bait, they're going to absolutely come up and crush it. And this is a bait that I've had a lot of success with over the past couple of weeks, especially fishing in that 15-foot zone. When those fish can track it from a long ways away, you let it sink 8 foot of water down, they'll come up to it and they'll absolutely crush that bait. It's also really effective, as I mentioned, at imitating those bigger bait fish, so you're doing a better job at matching the hatch when those fish are keying in on those bigger perch, those bigger shiners, those bigger white bass that they like to key in on, or other bait fish that they're feeding on. So I want to really dive into the gear quickly, because as you get into this bigger 100, you're not going to want to throw it on your 7/6 medium light. I'm throwing it on my jerkbait setup. So this is a TFO option bass. This is a new rod they're coming out with in the fall. It's a 7-foot medium, and it's like a moderate fast bend. They call it a fast, but it bends deep into the blank to help keep those fish pinned. Then I'm throwing it on 8 to 10 pound test fluorocarbon line. It sinks at about a foot a second, maybe just over a foot a second. So what you'll do is you cast this bait out, count basically mid-depth. If you're in 15 foot of water, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then start your slow retrieve. And then I'm fishing it on a 5 speed gear ratio reel. You can fish it on a 6 speed gear ratio. I had this one in the garage. It's one of the best reels ever made, a Shimano Corrado E-Series, so it was perfect for this approach. And then you're just going to want to play these fish as if you were fishing them with a jerkbait. You know, obviously a moderate drag. You don't want to rip the hooks out of their face, but it does come with some pretty large stock hooks on this bait. So it's another approach when you start to get out to those suspended fish during the middle of summertime, and you want to fish a bigger profile bait. You notice they're eating larger perch, larger shiners. The Spinbait 100 is definitely worth a look because it's getting a lot of bites right now, and I promise you guys, when other guys are fishing that 80, this bait's going to catch some fish for you. One more finesse approach before we get into the big rods again, and this is the Great Lakes Finesse Sneaky Underspin. This is a bait I've played with a lot over the last year and a half. This is a bait that's caught me a ton of fish, and to be honest, I like it best during the middle of summertime, when those fish are up around those shallower flats, when those fish are up around those boulders, those color changes. This is a bait that gets a lot of bites. Just like that Spinbait 80, this is a bait that I'm going to use when I'm targeting those fish in moderate shallow water. You can get the larger size. This is the 3/16. You can get the larger size and fish it deeper, but for the most part, I'm really not fishing this bait anywhere deeper than 10 foot of water. I'm using this when I can see into the water. I'm using this to trigger fish to come up and eat this thing when they're keyed in on small bait fish, and the underspin just provides that little bit extra attraction. So the Great Lakes Finesse Sneaky Underspin has been a really, really key player for me, targeting those fish in shallow water. Then I have this paired up with the Excite Baits Minobi 3.3 in the black color. I'm typically going to throw this in black. I'm going to throw it in the OG, which is their just natural lead head with real shad, but you just want to match what those fish are feeding on. So if they're feeding on small minnows or shiners, you want to use maybe a green pumpkin style color. If they're feeding on little bugs and leeches, the black is a really, really killer color. I'm not even sure what this necessarily imitates, but I know it gets a lot of bites. Just a straight black with the straight black head and either the gold or silver blade. Now where I start to differentiate the blade color, if it's overcast, cloudy, or the water has a little bit of color to it, I'm going to fish the gold. If it's clean water, sunny conditions, I like that silver. It just has a lot of flash, looks really natural. Similar to spinnerbait blade selection, same way you're going to pick out the blade colors that you're going to fish on the Sneaky Underspin. This for me really though is a light line approach. So I'm going to fish this on a small reel with 8-pound test braided line to 6-pound test fluorocarbon. You want it to look really natural. You want that bait to travel straight. You don't want to impart a lot of action on this thing. It's a cast and slow, steady retrieve to keep that bait slowly moving straight through the water column. And then I'm using a long top shot leader. So what I mean by that is there's a 30-foot leader of fluorocarbon on top of that braid. Why I think that's really important is because it keeps that bait level out in the water. If you fish it on short leader with that braid, it's going to want to kind of rise up in the water, whereas that fluorocarbon will sink and keep that bait traveling horizontally for a longer period of time. You want this to look really natural, and I'm going to get up on those shallow flats looking for isolated big boulders, isolated bottom changes, or even those breaks where those shallow flats fall off towards those deeper, steeper drops. The rod that I'm fishing this on is actually the TFO Professional Series. This is the Professional Walleye Series, but I believe it's all Professional Series now. It's a 7.6 medium light, and it has a little bit stiffer backbone than your Tactical Elite, which is a softer rod designed specifically for spy baits and hair jigs. So this TFO Professional Series is one that I'm going with the little sneaky, and then basically a slower speed gear ratio reel. I don't want like a high speed gear ratio spinning reel, just a standard spinning reel, slow steady retrieve, fishing it around those isolated pieces of cover up on those shallow flats. My fourth unique bait that I'm going to talk about, and this is a bait you guys have seen me catch a lot of fish on and heard me talk about quite a bit, is a Finesse Football Jig. Now this jig in particular, as you guys can tell, is beat up. It has caught me probably hundreds of fish, and because they have that hand-tied skirt on there, this thing is going to probably catch me 100 more bass. This is a Beast Coast OW Sniper in a 1/2 ounce. You can vary the size that you fish, but for me a 1/2 ounce is extremely versatile because I can fish it quickly, it stays on bottom well, and I can fish it on a bait cast or a spinning rod depending on what I'm fishing it around. It's an extremely versatile bait that just gets a ton of bites. The other thing that I really like is that lighter skirt that they put in, the MB style colors. So I'm typically fishing the MB style skirts. It's a lighter skirt material, has fewer strands, and to me that just gets a lot more bites because I'm fishing this in places where I would traditionally fish a Ned rig, where most guys are taking a Ned rig with really light line and a light bait. I'm fishing this 1/2 ounce OW Sniper and dragging it through there, hopping it through there, getting reaction bites and getting bites from fish that don't want to bite those small Ned rig style profiles. So the trailer that I'm picking is critically important, and the one that I've fished quite a bit lately is the Snack Craw. But if I want a faster fall, and this is something my buddy Nathan figured out, is a Ned rig style bait, and this is the Duo Realis Wriggle ND. It's a 3-inch profile with your elastomer style material, and it catches a lot of fish, has a really fast fall, and that's where this comes into play. When those fish are in a reaction bite, when you need them to react to this bait, using a straight Ned rig style bait on the back of here will fall quickly, get on bottom, and sit up straight and trigger those fish to bite. That's the other key with that Snack Craw, is those claws are buoyant. So when this bait is on bottom, those claws are going to come up in a fighting position, and I believe that's really important when you're fishing this Finesse Football Jig. Having some buoyant style trailer that will stand up off the back, because I think that just draws you a couple extra bites. So when you're fishing inland bodies of water where you know they're feeding on crawfish, I would go with the Snack Craw. If you're fishing around fish where they need that reaction bite, a bait that falls fast, stands up in their face, or you're fishing around goby eaters, I would go with your standard Ned rig style plastic off the back. But most critically important is paying attention to the fall rate and having a bait that is buoyant off the back. And then again, that's a 1/2 ounce size. That's why I like to fish that. It falls fast, it gets down there, and stays down bottom really effectively. And then my final unique approach for summertime bass, and this is something I've been doing for a handful of years, is fishing a Wobble Head. A Wobble Head is super versatile, super good at imitating bait on the bottom, and a great alternative to fishing a crankbait or dragging that jig. The benefit of this is the freedom of movement that this bait has, and because you're fishing a heavier size, this is a 3/4 ounce, not only stays on bottom, but you can fish it quickly and get natural movement out of the trailer you put on here. Where I'm typically fishing this is around bottom composition changes or boulder fields, and most of the time I'm not going less than a 3/4 ounce head. If I'm fishing deeper than 15 foot of water, I might go to a 1 ounce head. I just want to really be able to maintain bottom contact, and that is for me the most important thing with a wobble head, is maintaining bottom contact while you're retrieving this bait along. Like I mentioned, this is a great alternative to a crankbait. So when those fish get on that crankbait in the middle of summertime and they maybe seem to get lower in the water column and you have to stroke a tube, you can take this bait reel it along, cover a ton of water on those big, massive flats, especially on your bodies of water like Lake St. Clair or Lake Champlain when they get in those boulder fields, and you can reel this bait through there moderately fast to trigger a lot of fish. The trailer I've rigged up on here is the Beast Coast Flippin' Delight, and what I like about this is that these claws move water at slow speeds. So it doesn't matter how slow you reel this bait, those claws are kicking, flapping, moving water, and it's triggering those fish to come over to that bait. You also want a moderate profile. You don't want a giant profile bait, and something that is pretty thin. If you fish your thicker style baits that have those kicking appendages, it's a little bit harder to get the hook through to actually hook up with these fish because it is a moving presentation. They have to come in and eat that bait, and they have to be able to clear that body to get that hook point. The other key with this presentation is I am not typically going to Texpose or Texas rig this hook. I'm just going through the body and setting it out the back end. And for me, that's important because it still provides a little protection for that hook, but it allows that hook point to come free much, much easier. I went through a lot of trial and error with this bait because it's something that gets a ton of bites, but if you don't have the right setup, in my opinion, you miss a lot of fish. Now, if you're just straight dragging it, you cast it out and drag it along, which is an effective approach with this Wobble Head, you can pretty much use any jig rod. But if you're winding that bait and moving it, and you're setting the hook probably a little bit too hard, you need to have the right rod and reel setup. So the rod that I've landed on is a TFO 7.5 moderate fast. And what I like about this is it bends really deep into the blank. When those fish come up and they eat this bait, they don't necessarily get it every single time perfect. They don't come up and necessarily eat it from the head first. They'll kind of get the hook and get it funny on the side of their mouth. So you need a rod that has a little bit of forgiveness, and that moderate fast action allows this rod to bend deep into the blank so you don't pull that hook, which can happen a lot of times, especially if they eat it when you're not expecting it. I'm fishing it on 15 to 17 pound test fluorocarbon line, and as I mentioned, it's really important to maintain bottom contact, so I'm going with that little bit heavier pound test line that's going to allow this bait to come through effectively, and I'm not having to worry about breaking off every couple of minutes. You're still going to want to check your line quite often because you're fishing it around rock and gravelly bottoms, which is going to eat up this fluorocarbon, but that heavier line will help negate some of that. And then I'm fishing it on a big spool capacity reel, 7 speed, and like I mentioned, you just want to really maintain bottom contact. You want to have feel of the bottom, but not necessarily be dredging it up. So use the lightest size you can possibly get away with to still maintain bottom contact. And for me, my all-around size on that thing is a 3/4 ounce. Final thing about this setup is your color selection, and I'm keeping it really, really simple. I'm fishing this Tex color, which is a darker back with an amber belly, some orange and green flake. Really effectively matches those crawfish, as well as a variety of other bait fish on the bottom. Or I'm using like a green pumpkin or a pumpkin gill color, which is green pumpkin with purple flake. Super simple color selection. Don't get crazy. Don't overthink it. Most of your basic colors will work effectively on this. But that Beast Coast Flippin' Delight has that narrow body you need, has those kicking claws that I really like, and that 3/4 ounce head will keep this bait on bottom in most moderate depth situations. So those are my 5 unique baits that I fish in the late summertime that help me get bites when other guys maybe aren't. When other guys are fishing standard baits in an area, you can go to some of these unique presentations to trigger fish to bite that have been pressured all summer long. I'd be curious if I missed some of your favorite unique baits that catch fish during the summertime. So if I did, leave them down in the comment section down below. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you want to see more content like this, click this video right here. If you're not already, hit the subscribe button. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this is going to help you go out and catch more fish this summer. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Tight lines. God bless. Pursue your passion.